Hello, friends. Do you want to elevate your cannabis brand or product? Let's get real. Standing out in the cannabis industry isn't a walk in the park. That's where Green Lane Communication comes in. They're not just a cannabis-focused PR firm. They're your partners in getting genuine, valuable coverage, from features in major publications to shoutouts in niche blogs and podcasts. Hey, like this one, Cannabinoid Connect. But Green Lane Communication isn't just about making headlines. They're about building your narrative, crafting messages that speak directly to your audience, and creating robust media strategies that hit the mark. Whether you're just starting out or you're a seasoned player in the cannabis game, they've got the chops to amplify your presence. As we gear up for conference season and head into Q4, there's no better time to boost your brand's trust and credibility. Ready to make waves in the cannabis world? Reach out to Green Lane Communication. Check out their offerings at greenlanecommunication.com or find the link right in our episode description. Let's elevate your cannabis journey together with Green Lane Communication.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.
Are recording. Katie, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yes, absolutely. I want to first get to know, get a sense of your background. There's this kind of theme that I'm gathering from policy to practice, right? You had a transition from roles in government affairs, in-house counsel, and now you're working at Dickinson and Avella. Is that correct?
Yeah, Dickinson and Avella. That's correct.
Yeah. So tell me about, your experience working across all these various sectors in the cannabis industry, your journey kind of from, cannabis, like I said, policy to practice and why you're so passionate about the plant and the industry.
Well, growing up, I'd say I was a consumer. It was around where I grew up, and I like to point out that I grew up in a suburb outside of Syracuse, New York. So predominantly white, predominantly middle to upper class, right? And so to me, the plant.
So the good weed. You had good weed in your
neighborhood. Yeah. and like, honestly, it may have, it was permitted, right? Like, we knew it wasn't legal, but the kind of wrath of enforcement didn't exist where I lived. Right. And so to me, this has always been a fun plant when it became kind of, when I was professionally involved in it, I was like, wow, advocating and lobbying to legalize cannabis for medical purposes and or adult use purposes, like, what a no-brainer. How easy, how fun, right? Like, that was my attitude or my approach. And I learned really quickly that it is not easy. It is not straightforward. It is a complicated policy issue. It's a complicated subject matter.
Yep.
It took, several advocates, several hours of kind of patiently taking me to school, you know what I mean? So I could get my head around and understand the social justice and the social equity components of legalizing and regulating the industry. And I have deep respect for the individuals who kind of pulled me along in that process, because just growing up where I grew up and how I grew up with my relationship to cannabis, it's not something I ever paused to think about, the social justice components and the social equity components. And those are such important parts of crafting the laws and changing the laws. And then we see a ton of challenges on the implementation side, on the regulatory rollouts, to follow through on those policy goals. And so nothing in this industry is straightforward, just like nothing in legalizing or regulating it is straightforward. Everything is complicated. And to me, that's just fun, right? No day is the same as the previous day. No state is the same as any other state. No client is the same as any other client. There's no formula to this. I think the beauty of an emerging industry, but an emerging industry that has existed for a very long time and is a plant, is a substance that a lot of people have a relationship with already. So it's just such a unique intersection of lots of different policy issues. And, as a nerd who just thrives in like pervasively regulated industries, I love it.
Yeah. I mean, you articulated that very well. I mean, there's so many layers, so many challenges, so many intersections of, like you said, policy reform, social justice, social equity, abundance in terms of like benefits, right? Like on the material goods side, and even like of course medicinal, and then but environmental as well. And so the education gap between bringing people along, and then it's a lot to take in, but and it is unique. But what's beautiful about it too is I don't think it's for every entrepreneur. Like, starting a business and or like being, operating in an industry is not easy, but cannabis is especially difficult due to, the regulatory framework, or in the hemp situation, lack thereof regulation, right? So there's just a lot of hurdles to jump through. And so that's kind of a great segue, because we can start talking about the elephant in the room, which is, unpacking the slow rollout of the legal cannabis market in New York, and kind of what's going on there. Like, let's navigate the New York cannabis landscape for a second. Tell us about what you're seeing.
Yeah. Oh man, where to begin? So New York took its time legalizing and enacting what they ultimately did enact, which is called the MRTA, or MRTA, some people call it, which is the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. And that law passed in March of 2021. So we're like 2.5 years out from enactment. And let me give you like the state of the market, and then we can kind of dig into perhaps why it looks the way it looks. But in New York right now, we just have a conditional adult use market operating. So we have conditional growers and processors. There's around 280 of them licensed. And we have conditional adult use retail dispensaries, and they, in short, are called card licenses. And to be eligible for the conditional growers and processing licenses, you needed to be a hemp farmer, a licensed hemp farmer or processor here in New York, who had harvested for at least 2 years. And so that was the eligibility requirement there. And if you got one of those conditional cultivation or processing licenses, you have to grow, by and large, outdoors. It's about an acre of canopy outdoors. There is some greenhouse, some mixed light rules, but it's really limited canopy size. So we are talking small cultivation, the majority of which was grown outside. And that started 2 summers ago. So like May of 2022 was the first harvest, like seeds in the ground. They grew their first crop.
And that was a condition, like you said, you had to grow for 2 years, or did you say 2 harvests?
You had to have 2 years of operating. I think it was years, 2 years of operating as a licensed hemp grower or processor in order to be eligible. And so that was a nod, frankly, to the New York hemp industry, which I think everyone thought was going to take off and be this huge kind of boom for the agricultural industry here in New York. And it didn't materialize. And that's not, unique to New York, right? I think anyone and everyone in the hemp industry kind of had that boom and then underwhelming success. And
and what was the reason why it failed? I mean, like you said, it seems like it's a no-brainer, like an easy transition, right? To just kind of transition your farm from hemp cultivation to cannabis flower. So what was it?
Well, so I don't know that it failed yet. It's a kind of an experiment that's still playing out. So the like 280 hemp farmers here in New York who were struggling in the hemp program then were eligible to launch adult use. They ran a crop in 2022. What happened was the retail side. So the conditional adult use retail dispensaries didn't roll out as fast as New
Oh,
York hoped. And so we have a situation now where we have a ton of product from these
right.
conditional growers and processors and nowhere for it to go. And that was a story on the supply side. That on the retail side, the conditional rollout was different. And New York made a really thoughtful policy approach to their rollout where they said, you know what, we're not going to launch this adult use market with existing medical operators, most of whom, not all of whom, but most of whom are multi-state operators. They wanted to launch this adult use program with these small New York farmers, and then they wanted just as involved New Yorkers to launch retail. And so to be eligible for the conditional retail dispensary license, you had to be what we call justice involved. And so the regulator defined that as having a conviction, cannabis conviction under New York law, and operating a business, owning a business that was run profitably for at least 2 years. And that second factor caused some controversy, as you
Sure.
can imagine, here in New York. But you know, it was a way of taking a pool of, let's say, you know, 400 to 500,000 people who would have been eligible under the conviction part of that eligibility
And cut it right in half,
equation,
or cut
and
it.
cut it way down, right? Like
Right.
they kind of made the task a little more manageable for themselves. Also, not for nothing, they did want to value business experience. You know, have you run a business? Have you figured out kind of
Sure, but
how to manage
I think
investments and
I think
stuff
the
like that?
percentage is like 99 or 96% of all businesses fail after the first year, right? So
Right.
just looking at that national stat should kind of give you some idea of what's feasible and what's not. I mean, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so that, you know, that's the eligibility factors they went with on the retail side. And a lot of people who would be or will eventually be social and economic equity qualified candidates here in New York. That's the kind of the long version of social equity here in New York under the law. They were not included in that eligibility for these first conditional dispensaries. And so there certainly have been some litigation challenges that have popped up specific to this card rollout. And that's what the litigation is, one of a couple factors for why the retail rollout's been so slow. So part of it is the same story that every cannabis business encounters, which is access to capital is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the state had a vision of raising a $200 million fund that was going to provide capital to these conditional retail dispensary licensees. And that fund ran into a lot of challenges reaching the $200 million number. So that took a long time. And without that kind of money and those resources, actually getting card stores in storefronts and open for business was just painful, to be honest. Right. So I think in about a year, there were 20 stores and change, but you have, you know, 280 growers and processors. So the retail outlet wasn't meeting the supply side for our
Mm-hmm.
conditional rollout here in New York. So we do, that's the state of play as it is today. We have a huge problem. We've got 27, say 25 to 27 dispensaries open and operating. We have 400 and change dispensary licenses that have been provisionally awarded to these conditional licensees, but they're stuck. They're stuck because there is an injunction on that rollout. So they can't go ahead and do what they need to do to get those doors open, right? So we are kind of frozen in time at the moment with these 25, 27 adult use dispensaries. In the meantime, you know, the 280 plus conditional growers and processors did go ahead and start that second harvest this past summer. So the state says there's about 100,000 pounds of cannabis with like nowhere to go. So we have a problem. We do have a supply chain problem. I honestly don't know what's going to happen. There's kind of a few different things that could play out. First of all, the state did just open general applications, like for everyone, for all license types. And those are non-conditional, like full licenses. So that's, step one to kind of roll out a comprehensive adult use market. They did adopt the full package of adult use, or most of the adult use regs. There's still a few license types they need to promulgate subsequent reg packages on, like delivery, for example. But the big, 300-page reg document was adopted in September. So we're on our way. It's just a matter of what to do with this product that needs to either be flipped into distillate and shelf stable stuff that can wait until there's retail shelf space to sell it, or it's going to go to waste. So New York's been doing a lot of creative things. They did authorize growers showcases throughout the state this summer, and those will run through the end of the year at least. And those are sort of like, they're kind of like farmers markets for weed. They're pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty creative. I live in Saratoga Springs, and we have one locally. Right, that was a huge success from what I could tell, at least stopping by. So yeah, they popped up kind of late summer through the fall, and I think folks are trying to find some indoor venues to host them and keep that going through the end of the year. So the regulator's been nothing if not creative in trying to solve all the various hurdles and issues that have popped up. But obviously with regulator creativity comes a ton of stakeholder angst and criticism and
pushback,
political messiness. Pushback. So there's no shortage of drama here in New York. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it's not a lack of planning, but really poor execution, right? And even maybe like could be better maybe communication and alignment and collaboration between these departments and like of what they're doing, right? Because all of it, like you said, the retail side was impacted by the supply chain. Like there's all these different factors that kind of all domino affect each other. So, I mean, what is your take on that?
Yeah, look, I think hindsight's 2020, right? So most states, I think, right after they enact a big decriminalization and legalization bill, they want to move really quickly to get a regulated channel, a regulated supply chain open so that they can start to focus on converting consumers. And if it's a state that does care about social equity, converting legacy operators into those licensed channels,
which are thriving right now, right? I mean, the legacy
that's the huge thing that's happened in New York because we had a delay in turning on regulated channels. The illicit market has exploded. So, and it's very, very visible, very in your face in New York City, where depending on who you ask, there's anywhere between like 2,000 and 8,000 of these unlicensed pop-up shops, we call them.
So are they just like located in the city, like in different street corners? Like, are they like little bodega setups? Like, what do these things look like?
They're kind of all of the above. So there are for sure some sort of bodega corner store type vibes. And then there's like your kind of classic smoke shop where they're selling accessories.
Like wink, wink. Yeah.
Right. But like wink, wink, you could get some weed for sure. And then there's like very corporate looking illicit pop-ups with like neon lights and balloons and it's confusing, right? It's confusing for consumers who aren't paying attention to this stuff day in and day out. They walk by, they see like, Weed World, right? Newsflash, Weed World is not licensed, but they're all over New York. So, your
Well,
everyday person doesn't know that. So they
yeah,
go in and they buy whatever, right? And I do think it's important to distinguish that like illicit pop-up phenomenon that is playing out as distinct and different than what I mean when I say legacy operator. Like when I say legacy operator, to me, I'm talking about
the cultivators that have been in
the
the game for a while,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. The people who have been running this industry in New York for probably longer than I've been alive, and they know what
right.
they're doing, and it's accessible, affordable, high quality,
Yep.
and those are the operators that a lot of the social equity programming that's in New York's law is attempting to. They're trying to recruit and attract those operators into those licensed regulated channels. So there is a distinction in my mind, at least, between legacy and illicit, with legacy being, if they want a license, they should be prioritized to get a license. They obviously know what they're doing. And then illicit being arguably people who are taking an opportunistic approach to this gap between decrim and legalization and an actual regulatory rollout. And they're just cleaning up on consumer confusion and the reality that the state is completely overwhelmed by this and is trying to do some serious enforcement, but nothing with government moves fast.
No. Yeah, I think we all can agree on that. That is a bipartisan issue for sure among the
Right.
American people.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you talked about, like, I think you gave one example of how regulators are trying to solve this, these issues to kind of keep the rollout going, right, and kind of maybe expedite it. So, are there other pathways and solutions of expediting, to ensure safety and compliance, but also like go online?
Yeah. I mean, one very obvious one, but very controversial one. And in full disclosure, I do work with a lot of these companies. They're my clients. So this is going to be like a client plug, if you will. But the medical operators in New York have been operating within the medical program here, which is very strict, pretty conservative from a compliance perspective, for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in 2024. Their role or their option to transition and participate in adult use is pretty clearly prescribed in the statute, in the law. There's for sure some key regulatory determinations that need to be made. And of course, ultimately, any transition into adult use has to be approved by the Cannabis Control Board. So there's like a regulatory component to it. But
Right.
their deal, if you will, that's in the law is that they can either transition into the adult use market on the supply side. And for any of your listeners who don't know the basic framework of New York, which I'm just realizing we didn't talk about, New York is setting this up in a really strict 2-tier marketplace. So there's like a brick wall between the supply side licenses and the retail side licenses here in New York. And what's complicated about that with the medical operators is they are vertically integrated. So they blow through that brick wall as mandated of them in the medical program. And so the law says these vertically integrated operators that already exist in New York can transition into the adult use market either just as suppliers, so no retail presence in adult use, or vertically integrated, where they can co-locate adult use within 3 of their medical dispensaries. And they do get a total of 8 medical dispensaries. So they would, under that pathway, these vertically integrated operators would have 8 dispensaries statewide. 5 of those would be medical only. 3 of them would have medical and adult use. But they would be cultivating, processing, distributing for both the medical and the adult use market. So that's that vertically integrated option. And many of them are very interested in that option,
Sure.
as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Right. And with that privilege, they would have to pay, according to the law, a special licensing fee. That fee is to be determined by the regulator, and the only thing the law says about the amount of the fee is that it shall be adequate to fund the social and economic equity programs and goals of the law. So in other words, these vertically integrated operators get to stay vertically integrated in adult use in exchange for a giant licensing fee. That licensing fee will be used to solve some of the access to capital issues faced by everyone, but overwhelmingly faced by social equity businesses in this industry. So there was, a method to the madness there.
Right. So just to interject really quick. So they're guaranteeing an earmark for that money. It's not like going into some general fund or anything like that. Like,
yeah, that's correct. So the law is very clear. It's like the license fee will go into the Cannabis Revenue Fund and shall be an adequate amount to pay for the social equity programs, which shall include an incubator, technical assistance, and zero or low interest loans or grants. So that's sort of the to-do list for the state. This regulator does need to implement all of those sort of components to a social equity program and fund it with the license fees of these medical operators. The issue, of course, is that New York wanted to launch the program with the small hemp farmers and with justice involved individuals on retail. And so those medical operators are not in the adult use program yet as of today. And we do now know, we know the regs address that transition. And with the application window now open for everyone, that does include the RO. So they do know what they need to do to go ahead and apply to transition. But it's been a tense 2.5 year wait for them and everyone else. But that would, allowing them in is controversial because no one here in New York politically wants to see the program launched with multi-state operators. On the other hand, when they get in, they will solve a lot of processing issues for that 100,000 plus pounds of what ultimately will realistically just be biomass by the time it's able to be processed and moved. Their retail outlets on the adult use side, it's small, it's modest. So it'll be meaningful at first because when you only have 27 stores, any additional store selling adult use is a big deal. But eventually, the regulators have said they envision 2,000 dispensaries, adult use dispensaries statewide. The medical operators would max be 30 of them.
Right.
30 to 33 of them. So we're talking 2% of the retail footprint taken up by these companies. So, if you're planning the rollout for long-term success and sustainability, getting them into the adult use market now isn't a big deal, right? It bridges a gap, it solves a bunch of problems, and they won't dominate. They can't dominate. Their footprint's codified in law.
Right.
But there are definitely, there's a cap. To be fair, there are plenty of people with a different viewpoint than that, but that is my viewpoint. So
sure. No,
yeah.
No, I get it. And I mean, that pathway that you talked about with the medical cannabis, having the option to remain vertical, right, and operate as a vertically integrated business, and the money being earmarked going back to the social equity program sounds great. It makes sense. I mean, but you're saying that there's challenges in terms of the rollout and it's being delayed like everyone else, right, at this point.
Yeah, they've been delayed and kind of held back. And I get it. New York wants to say we launched adult use different vis-a-vis any other state. We are building it with justice involved people, with social equity licenses and businesses, with New Yorkers and small and mid-sized businesses. and making sure that they have the room to have a meaningful presence in the space and like get their consumers, get their feet under them before bigger corporate interests kind of come in. And I work with those corporate interests, right? So I know that they respect and support that overall goal, and they don't view this as a zero-sum game. But when it's 2.5 years later, now they are starting to get a little antsy, especially because the medical program here is just so lackluster. It's so small. I mean, we have like 125,000 patients.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, I wanted to talk about, like, provide us an overview of like common qualifying conditions for the medical cannabis program in New York, the process for obtaining a medical cannabis card, and the current state, like maybe how the rollout is even impacting the medical market currently.
Yeah, I mean, in most states, when you have a medical program and you turn on adult use, you see the medical program get cannibalized because consumers, including patients, will just do what's most convenient. And in New York, that cannibalization hasn't materialized because the adult use market's been so slow to roll out. But what has happened is a patient drop to a suspected illicit market, right? So these pop-up shops are sort of turning into the alternative for patients because the kind of the facts on the medical side, which is not good, right? That's not good for patients. That's not good for medical operators. That's not good from a regulator perspective, like an elected official perspective. Like that's just objectively bad.
Right.
We can all agree on that.
Totally.
Like the state of play on the medical program is abysmal. Like it's a historically has been a very challenging program in regards to becoming a patient. We had a very limited qualifying conditions list. The adult use law that got enacted in 2021 did include really important policy changes for the medical program. So it expanded the qualified conditions list, and it added kind of this catch-all category there that just said, a healthcare practitioner can recommend cannabis as treatment for anything that he or she deems it appropriate for. So that was great. It was a step closer to eliminating the qualified conditions list, which I think should happen. But practitioner discretion is a big deal, and that did get codified. The other kind of challenge in the medical program was, in the past, flower products of any kind, whole flower, ground flower, just any flower, was prohibited. It wasn't allowed. That was an old Department of Health worldview, which I guess makes sense if you think about it as the health regulator. They didn't want to do anything that was, had the optics of promoting smoking. And so we didn't have flower. The law that was enacted in 2021 provided a pathway for flower. And that recently got enacted, like last year. Historically speaking, whole flower was not allowed in the New York medical program. So the law in 2021 that got enacted, it did provide a pathway for flower in the medical program. And that was finally approved and implemented by the regulator last year. So there are these improvements to the medical program that were codified in 2021 that are still today not fully implemented, which is also a source of frustration for the medical community here in New York. So, the law, we have 40 dispensaries authorized statewide. That's it. That's like one for every 500,000 patients. I think it's the lowest per capita of any state that has a legal medical program.
Well, and New York's so big, and you mentioned the bodegas, right? Those pop-up shops, like no wonder, like that's where they're going. I mean, talk about convenience, like you said, not to say that's the best thing, but if you need, the medicine, you're going to get it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so we are seeing patients kind of drop out for the illicit market, and that's a pain point. That's a big pain point. The law doubled the amount of medical dispensaries that the medical operators could run, but we're like nowhere in implementing that with the regulator. So we do need some guidance, some regs, some guardrails from the regulator about how exactly all these licensees can go ahead and cite dispensaries, 5 through 8.
Mhm.
And that's something that hasn't been done yet. So that's a pain point. And you brought up how you become a patient in New York. It was really, really antiquated until maybe a month or two ago. So
Really?
this regulator just implemented an auto registration. So you basically talk to your practitioner, get the recommendation, and you can bring that right into the dispensary with you and get auto registered then
Oh,
and
that's
there.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, which is awesome. Before you had to kind of take that certification, fill out a bunch of forms, snail mail stuff in, wait for an actual like ID card to get snail mailed back to you, all before you could walk into a dispensary. I mean, it just didn't work. So all of those things combined is why we only have 125,000 patients. But that's a big part of what I do. I like headed into 2024, we'll be lobbying the legislature to enact even more kind of expansions and improvements to the medical program, see if we can get this patient count up and just get a healthy medical program that can survive and be available for the patients that need it.
Right. Yeah, it's super important. I mean, at the end of the day, the patients, they're the most important, right? The people that actually have the serious ailments. I mean, we all use it, or most of us use it recreationally, right? But it helps. I mean, it's medicine at the end of the day, and so you're fighting the good fight there, Katie. I want to switch gears and just talk about forecasting the future. I always, ask these guests to pull out their crystal ball. A decade from now, right? Like, where do you see the New York cannabis market?
A decade from now, what would that put us in? 2033?
Yep.
Well, man, I hope we're in a multi-billion-dollar industry. I hope the job projections have materialized, right? So again, depending on who you ask or what you read, New York's legal cannabis market should produce something between 25 and 60,000 jobs. So 10 years from now, I hope it's a multi-billion-dollar industry with tens of thousands of jobs, with hundreds, if not thousands, of licensees who are running profitable businesses. And we see the plant destigmatized. We see the really conservative regulations New York has adopted in regards to marketing and advertising loosen up a little bit. I mean, they went hard on marketing and advertising here. It is objectively the strictest rules,
How so?
versus any other state. I mean, there's no out of home, there's no third party tech that you can utilize. There is, your target audience has to be 90% or above over 21. I mean, any dial that they have in regards to marketing and advertising that you see pop up in other states, they took it and they turned it all the way up and then some, right? Like, so like most progressive state in the country, we like to say here in New York, but like Nixon era advertising and marketing regs, like it's not intuitive. And I think as time goes on and people realize like, oh, we can have this regulated industry, we can do consumer education in a responsible way. Youth access actually goes down when you have a regulated channel. I think we'll see those regs loosen up. We'll see people be able to actually operate a business, creatively or more traditionally, like mainstream businesses, get those people in the door, get them ordering online, right? Like in New York, you won't be able to use those third-party tech platforms that exist in all these other markets to facilitate delivery or do consumer education. So I think a lot of things like that will get dialed back as we are 10 years out, or I hope so.
Right.
And
Would
here's like where I'll put my money as well as I do not think the two-tier licensing system that New York is instituting will survive 10 years from now. I don't think we'll see that.
I don't think so either. I think it's highly optimistic, right? Their approach and trying to kind of balance and make things equal. But I don't either. I mean, I think through, and this is your world, but probably through lawsuits from the MSO who's pushing back over time because they're operating differently in other states, right? I just can't imagine that they would just sit back while New York being the biggest market, right? Operates that way. What do you think?
I think you're spot on. I mean, look, the MSOs that are here in New York right now with a medical license are in a unique situation with what I would characterize as a attractive business opportunity for adult use. But if you are an MSO that is not in New York and you are vertically integrated anywhere, so you've got cultivation ownership anywhere outside of New York, your only path in adult use here in New York is on the supply side. So growing, processing, and or distributing, but you cannot touch retail, consumption lounges, or delivery. And I would not be surprised if an out-of-state MSO wanted to challenge that rule.
Right. And others will jump on, right? I mean, over time.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I think those are really good predictions, and obviously there will be challenges and opportunities that arise in the meantime between all that. I mean, is there some that kind of stick out to you at the moment?
For sure, the third-party tech stuff, I think that will get walked back or revised sooner rather than later. I think the marketing and advertising will take time. We do have some kind of conservative pockets throughout New York, whether you're talking about like Long Island or some spots upstate where, there are people who are concerned about youth access and youth use. I would argue that's likely happening already with like the illicit market problem.
Sure.
But,
it
I
has
think
been
that one
for a
will
while.
yeah, exactly. I think that one will take longer to get your decision makers to loosen up on that front. And, I do think we'll see the two tiers fall. I don't think they'll stand, but I don't know how long that will take.
Yeah. Well, Katie, you're full of insights. Really appreciate you helping us unpack and navigate through the New York cannabis market, current state, future predictions. And we also dove into the medical cannabis program in New York, which I know that you're heavily focused on. So really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with before we go here?
Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. If you need anything or have any questions on New York, feel free to hit me up. I absolutely love working in the cannabis space and helping people navigate this rollout. So I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. And I just love talking to prospective business owners and applicants and people that want to get in this space and join us.
Well, it was a pleasure, Katie. Really, thanks for coming on. We'll have to have you on again real soon as things evolve and develop in New York.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep, of course. And thank you all for listening. Bye.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.